We're going to start our meeting today with the pledge to the flag given by David Howard. David?
All right.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As all of you know, yesterday was Flag Day. So today I'm going to read, instead of having an invocation, it'll be a reading of a poem by Major Kelly Strong called Freedom is Not Free. I watched the flag pass by one day. It fluttered in the breeze. A young man in uniform saluted it, and then he stood at ease. I looked at him in uniform, so young, so tall, so proud, with hair cut square and eyes alert. He'd stand out in any crowd. I thought how many men like him had fallen through the years, how many pilots' planes shot down, how many died at sea, how many foxholes were soldiers' graves. No, freedom is not free. I heard the sound of taps one night when everything was still. I listened to the bugler play and felt a sudden chill. I wondered just how many times the taps had meant amen when a flag had draped the coffin of a brother or a friend. I thought of all the children of mothers and the wives of fathers, sons and husbands, with interrupted lives. I thought about a graveyard at the bottom of the sea, of unmarked graves in Arlington. No, freedom is not free, by Major Kelly Strong. I just want to call your attention to a couple of things in our program before I introduce the speaker. Pay attention to the Veterans in the Classroom project. Sheila Martin and her team did a great job, and we're going to need your help and support to help us continue this program in the fall. Also, I want to advise that the Air Museum at the Naval Air Station is open Wednesday, Saturday, and Sundays, 10:30 to 4 p.m. In about 3 weeks, we will have a Medal of Honor on display with a Norden bomb sight. And I'm going to tell you, you can't see an ME-262, a Medal of Honor, and a Norden bomb sight east of the Mississippi. So come on up and see us. Cost is free. Contributions are accepted. And of course, we do want some volunteers to help us as we expand to give good tour guides. This afternoon, we have a real treat. Bernard Fineman, Tech Sergeant Fineman, entered the 12th Air Force and then the 1st Tactical Air Force, the 42nd Wing, 17th Bomb Group. He has an interesting story to tell you about some of his mishaps, and he's going to correct one little item in the introduction as he goes through his talk. So let's welcome Tech Sergeant Bernard Fineman.
It's a pleasure to be here and be able to tell you the story, what happened to me, some of our fellow airmen, and I think you'll find it interesting as to basically what had taken place during World War II. One thing I do want to correct here, it indicates that I was shot down 3 times. I'm sorry to tell you I was not shot down 3 times. I was in 2 crash landings, one a belly landing where we had no landing gear at all, and one the main gears in the tail. And I was wounded twice. The first time I was wounded, the anti-aircraft fire hit underneath the plane and lacerated my left leg, and the bleeding was stopped in a field hospital. The second time was serious. I'll go over that a little later and inform you. It was just basically step by step what really had taken place. I was inducted into the Army. There was a draft at the time, and at that particular time we were not permitted to volunteer, but we could sign a voluntary induction and you would go into the service immediately, which I did, and within 2 weeks I was in the service. I was only out of high school 6 months, and I didn't know what branch of the service that I'd actually be going into. But I knew it was important for me to educate myself in different fields, just in case I had a duty and maybe in one of those fields. So while I was going to high school, I was also going to a Bach vocational school in the evening, studying electronics, electricity, and things of that nature. And I was also, while I was working in the New York shipyard as an electrician, I was also going to Temple University in the evening, studying engineering. And when I was inducted, some odd things did happen. I came with a bunch of our friends, and we all figured, well, we'll probably maybe stick together. But that wasn't the case, because what actually had taken place was when we went for to be selected as to what branch of the service that we were going to be in. We had to have a physical, a flight physical, and everybody went for the flight physical, including me, and they had indicated on my physical that I had a hernia. And this seemed odd because I was only in the service 18 days, so I don't know how I ever had a hernia. But anyhow, everyone went for classification. And when I got to the hospital, the doctor examined me and said, "He can't find any hernia. You just go back and get classified." So I remember running back to try to get classified. And the classification was pretty much over because they were coming out of the building with very long faces. What happened? Every one of them became an MP because that's what they needed that particular day. Well, that didn't suit me very well because I didn't feel like becoming a military policeman in the service. And I went over to the classification officer, and he says, "I'm sorry," he says, "the classification's been filled for today. You'll have to make an appointment for tomorrow." Well, I had a bad night because I was worrying about me carrying a gun and the prisoner walking in front of me and things of that nature. So I went to the classification officer the following day. And the classification officer said, "Well, Fineman, what do you want to do in the service?" I said, "Sir," I don't know. I was under the impression that everybody became an MP. He says, "That quota was reached yesterday. What would you like to do?" He says, "You have good qualifications," and he said, "You can go to aircraft mechanics school, you can go to radio school, you can go to OCS," and he named quite a few things. I said, "You know, when I was just a youngster, I always loved airplanes, and I always liked to fix them and read about them. In fact, my brother even had an airplane built in the basement. We did have a little problem getting it out, but we worked together." So I said, "I would like to become an aircraft mechanic." So he says, "Well, what else would you like to be in case it's full?" I said, well, maybe a radio man. So he classified that also as a radio man. And then it came to the point where they already had me going to aircraft mechanic school down Seymour Johnson Field, North Carolina, which I spent 6 months in aircraft mechanic school. After I finished aircraft mechanic school, they came to me and they said, do you have any objection to flying? I have no objection to flying. They weren't telling me that they were getting me ready to start to be in the air instead of on the ground. So I was then sent to gunnery school in Fort Myers, Florida, in which I became, at that particular time, an aerial gunner. But since I had the qualifications of an aircraft mechanic, the next step after aerial gunnery school was advanced engineering school, where they would now combine my skills as a mechanic and also to become a gunnery. I passed my gunnery. So now I was ready in this particular time to form a crew in Louisiana, in Lake Charles, Louisiana, where we formed crew number 12. And once we had the crews formed, we now were ready to start a procedure to go in combat. Now we flew from Lake Charles, Louisiana to Savannah, Georgia. When we got to Savannah, Georgia, they had a brand new airplane for us right off the flight line. A beautiful B-26 Martin Murata. There was just the three of us now. There was the pilot, the co-pilot, and the flight engineer, which was myself. And now, with that airplane, the three young kids, I was 19, I think the co-pilot was like 20, and I think the pilot was like 21 years old. We got a brand new airplane. Well, we flew from Savannah, Georgia to Puerto Rico. So we figured, boy, this is beautiful. Puerto Rico's really a nice place to be stationed. But they didn't tell us there was another set of orders for us. The next set of orders went from Puerto Rico to South America. Now remember, we're doing all the navigation ourselves, and I had to maintain the plane in all daily and morning inspections and everything to make sure that the plane was in top shape. And periodically we had a problem. We had to put the plane, because the magneto went bad on us. And it was my job to find out that the magneto was no good, so we had to bring it in for maintenance. So after we got to the top of South America, we then flew to Natal, Brazil. And in Natal, Brazil, was our jumping off point from Brazil over to the Ascension Islands in the center of the Atlantic Ocean. There is one large rock there. There is no vegetation. There is no water. The only thing you have to do is go down from the height of the mountain down to the shoreline, and they used to have Lister bags where they did something with the water so we can drink it. And the following morning, we were to take off to Dakar, North Africa. Well, when I inspected the plane in the morning, apparently they must have had a sandstorm during the evening, because there was large cakes of hard sand on the wings. Now, I knew that this could be a very dangerous thing because the airfoil is broken and the plane could have a problem staying up using a lean mixture where we had to get to Africa. So I spent time trying to scrape this off, and I just couldn't get it all off. So I went to the pilot, and I said, I'm having problems getting the sand off the wings. So he said, well, it looks pretty good to me. I think we ought to take off. So we took off, and we started to head to North Africa. Well, he's found out that he can't keep the plane up there. He had to use a very strong mixture. We would have never gotten there. So he says, you know, if we can't get back here, he says, we're going to have to bail out over the ocean, which, you know, everybody seemed, you know, that water could be pretty cold. So anyhow, he said, well, look at that black cloud ahead of us. We're going to see if we can get through that cloud. There's a possibility it may be saturated with water. And that's what we did. We flew through that cloud, and by the time we got to the other end of it, there wasn't a drop of sand on the plane, and that plane just jumped right ahead. So now we landed in Dakar, North Africa. When we landed in Dakar, North Africa, the pilot and the co-pilot, they used to take off. They wanted to go into town, and wherever they wanted to go, they would leave. But I would always stay with the airplane to make sure that the plane was in good condition. Well, when they took off, I was doing things in the plane when the MPs pulled up in their Jeep. And he said, you can't leave the plane here. This plane has to be taken way over to the other field. I says, I'm not the pilot, I'm only the engineer. He says, I don't care what you are, you gotta move this airplane. Well, I only had theory in moving a plane, so I figured I might as well put the theory to work now. And I moved, and I taxied the plane over to the other area. We were now ready to go to Sardinia. And we went with the C-47, and it took us to Sardinia. And in Sardinia, we were to now start bombing Italy from the lower portion, the various Sicily and Rome and Naples. And we were in the lower part of it, but our troops were trying to advance. On my sixth mission, I was sent back. It was actually, I think it was around the fifth mission. I was sent back to North Africa to teach the French gunnery, and my pilot was to teach the French how to fly the plane. By the way, the plane was taken by the French government, and they were the ones that would use our plane. Well, after getting done, after finishing with the training of the French, we were then sent back to Sardinia, in which we started combat. Let me tell you a story now about one of my buddies who slept in the tent with me. There was around 4 or 5 in the tent. Bill Solar. I don't know if you know him or not, but anyhow, he came from the Northeast, and his mother and my mother were very friendly because he was from Philadelphia and I was from Philadelphia. And here's what happened to Bill Solar. We were on a mission in Italy. The mission, it was a bombing mission. It was for supplies. And what had taken place was this. Bill was flying in number 3 position, and I was flying in number 6 position, which was directly behind Bill. Okay? The flak was very heavy, intense, and accurate. And what had taken place, the burst of flak hit us off to our wing and knocked my plane completely out of control. And Bill's plane ran into a heavy barrage of anti-aircraft fire. It was a long mission, and we had to stop back in Naples it was already taken by the American units. I was now on the top of the airplane, fueling the plane, when I see Bill's plane come in for a landing. The bomb bay doors were open. He had no landing gears. The pilot was hit in both legs with anti-aircraft fire. The co-pilot was wounded in both hands. The engineer had a wound in the front and a wound in the back. Everyone aboard the plane was wounded from this heavy barrage they ran into, except Bill Solar. And I saw the plane coming in with the bomb bay doors open, no landing gear, and I knew they really were in trouble. I stopped my fueling and I started to run towards the flight line to see if I could be of any assistance there, because I knew it's going to be a bad crash landing. When the plane hit the ground, the pilot forgot to feather the props. Feather the props mean to turn the props at an angle where they bend underneath the plane. So the props now splintered, went through the side of the airplane, and hit Bill in the head. When I got there, they were pulling him out of the airplane, and there was blood all over the plane because the severity of the wound. They then took him to the Naples hospital, the military hospital. I didn't think he was going to live, because what I found out, that there was 2 inches of scalp that was missing when the prop hit him on the head. It wasn't more than maybe a couple of months where as a flight engineer, we used to pick up crews for entertainment. We used to pick up beer. We used to pick up mail and things of that nature. So at one time we had a trip to Naples, and I asked the pilot, I'd like to go to Naples Hospital and see Bill. And he said, go ahead. And he told me that he's now going back to the United States. And he was still alive. And he spent 1 year in Haddon Hall in Atlantic City at the hospital. And they didn't think he was going to live, but apparently he did live a whole lifetime, except about 3 years ago when he did pass away. And this was one of the things that we ran into. There's a few things on my 43rd mission. We were on a flight where there was very heavy, intense, accurate flight. The whole plane was shot up. but there was no wounded personnel aboard. And when we come to land, we found out we had no landing gear at all. The landing gear was completely shot away. So now we had to belly in on the right on the belly without landing gear at all. And everybody took their position. I was resting my back against what we called a bathtub, which is the steel encasement around the pilot. And we crash landed the plane. You'll never get a sensation like that in your life. When you hit the ground in a crash landing, it feels like somebody's got their feet against you, pushing you against a solid steel wall. And we crash landed the airplane. Now, there was a certain procedure that had to be followed that the flight engineer was aware of. Otherwise, in most cases, that plane exploded. And the survival rate on something like is very nominal. After we crash landed, everybody got out of the plane and you start running. I got out of the plane, and when the plane was stopped, I went back into the plane again and I shut off both fuel cocks. That, I think, saved the airplane. So we had one more plane to use. On my 55th mission, just get okay, on my let's see if I get the I want to make sure I get my order here correctly. On my 55th mission, the flak was very heavy, intense, and accurate. And a burst of anti-aircraft fire hit underneath the airplane and lacerated my leg. I think I'd indicated that before. Okay. Now, on the 60th mission that I was on, the 60th mission, I'd already won 13 air medals. I already won 2 Purple Hearts. This was on the final 60th mission. This was what I would have had. The burst flak hit the nose of the airplane where I was sitting, right here. I was the bombardier. It was the day of the bulge, and we were ordered by General Patton to knock out part of the Siegfried Line in Germany, because he now had to get his tanks back into Germany. I was the bombardier, and it was 100% accuracy in bombing. The flak hit the nose of the airplane where I was sitting and knocked out the complete nose. It hit me in the chest and it hit me in the head, but it didn't penetrate my flak suit. And it hit me in a helmet. This is not the original helmet. The original helmet was taken by Protective Armament, and I had to leave it with them because it's part of what the protection will do. But I was fortunate enough to get onto eBay and find out where I would be able to find a helmet that was identical, the M3 helmet, as what I was wearing. And I found one, and the man wanted $100 for it, and I was glad to give it to him. Now I have a perfectly good helmet. Now they did give me a photograph of the helmet when instead of the actual helmet, and I went to a friend of mine who was a auto and body shop man. And I said, look, I want you to duplicate every phase of this helmet to what I was wearing. Can you do it? He says, I think I can do it. And he's not just an ordinary auto and body man, but this man does antique cars, and he restores cars to where they're better looking when he got done with them than when they just come off the flight line, just come off the line. And he did, right in front of me. He put the dent back into the helmet, identical to the way the aircraft was done here. If it wasn't for the double lamination of steel over here and double lamination of steel here, it would have penetrated the helmet. If I wasn't wearing a helmet, I would have been killed instantly. There's no doubt about it. And as I was still in the nose of the airplane and still over the target area, the pilot says, get out of the nose and give the co-pilot first aid. Well, in order for me to get out of the nose, there's a little trap door about that size. The co-pilot must bring his chair back, and I must crawl through that little hole in the wall to get to him. And he had gotten a piece of shrapnel and just cut his hand wide open like that. And I remember taking a sulfur powder from his first aid kit, putting a sulfur powder on, and also bandaging his arm and his hand. Now the engines are still going, and we're still getting very close to our base because we were only about 60 miles from Germany. We were operating from Dijon, France, and we had to knock out the Siegfried line. It was 100% accuracy in bombing, got an air medal for it, and General Patton was able to get his tanks through there. We can now come over to base, and the base, our plane fires a red flare indicating wounded personnel aboard, so they give us priority to land. Puts his landing gear, the indicator, in a down position, and we find out that our nose wheel was shot away. We had no nose wheel. So since I was a flight engineer before, I said to the pilot, we'll start using emergency procedures and see if we can get the landing gear down manually, in which we tried. But apparently the actuating cylinder must have been completely shot away at that time too, so it would not come down. I said, let me try one more thing. Now you remember, when that burst hit me, the small particles from the nose hit me in the face, and one piece went right through my eye. So I was blind in that one eye. And the situation was that I tried to see if I can get into the wheel well. if I can get into the wheel well, there was be a possibility of me breaking the lock and pushing the landing gear down if it was feasible to do. But that would mean if I did get the wheel down, there's no way for me to get back up into the plane again, so I would have to ride it down on the wheel. But there was not enough room, actually, to get into the wheel well. So we now had to crash land the plane. We crash landed on a mud strip. And the pilot was a good pilot. We were able to get whatever was not nailed down, we had to put by the tail. And between the tail gunner and the engine and myself, the bombardier, the engineer that was on there, we all got to the tail end to try to lower the weight on the tail so we can keep the tail from, because the plane could spin over and there's no way out once you do that. Well, we landed the plane, and as we were landing, the ambulance is riding right along our plane. And they were fantastic. The plane hadn't even come to a complete stop when they had me and they had the co-pilot into the ambulance. And we were then taken over to the flight surgeon. And the flight surgeon examined me, and I says, am I going to lose my eye? He says, it doesn't look good. He says, you have an internal hemorrhage in your head. He said, look, he says, we're going to have to send you to the hospital in a Jeep because we got 4 more crash landings coming in. This was one day, the day of the bulge. When we got to the hospital, I never saw a scene like this in my life. The hospital was like a large barracks, and as far as the eye could see, with no more than 12 inches between each bed, was wounded personnel. I was then treated very well. They x-rayed every part of my body. And the doctor said, you have to be still because we have to stop the hemorrhaging in your head. And it took 5 days to stop the hemorrhaging. And after the 5 days, then I was sent back to my squadron. When I got back to the squadron, I had already completed 60 combat missions. My replacement was in. I was training the replacement. And I was given a set of orders to report to the United States at the earliest possible time. So I flew from Dijon, France to Paris. So I figured, I might as well enjoy Paris. I mean, there's no order, no time limit for me to get home, so I might as well enjoy it. Then there came an alert. The German paratroopers had landed outside of Paris. So I figured, well, I think I'll see Paris another time. So I then got a C-47 plane, and we went from Paris to London. And I spent a couple of days in London there. And I went over to headquarters and I said, I have orders to report to the United States. I would like to fly back. They said, we're sorry. You can't fly back because we're only taking stretcher cases back. So they gave me a ticket, railroad ticket, to get to Liverpool. I went by train to Liverpool. Now I think there's something you should know at this particular point. When I was wounded in the hospital, I asked the doctor, I says, I don't want any telegrams to go home. And the doctor said, no, I don't have anything to do with it. So I said, okay. Now I'm writing home to my parents that I'm doing transition flying, training, not really in combat, okay? I mean, I didn't give them the indication. I found out later that Bill Solar and my mother got together and they knew I was in combat. But anyhow, I was sending letters home. So now, my brother has my correspondence, and he has a telegram from the War Department that I'm seriously wounded. So he gets in touch with the War Department, and he says he can't believe, because how could he be seriously wounded? I'm getting the mail. So he said he wants confirmation. So now the second telegram comes to my parents. I don't know what they were thinking when that Western Union boy came to the door with a telegram for the second time. I imagine they thought the worst. But anyhow, the second telegram confirmed that I was seriously wounded. So my brother's still not satisfied. So he goes to Washington, to the War Department. He explains the condition, shows the letters and everything. And they send him to the Pentagon in Virginia. And he explains the whole story to them. Now the problem is, I'm waiting for a boat, which they said would take at least a month before it would be my turn. And there's no correspondence, no telegrams, no telephone, no letters are to be shipped from a port of embarkation. It's 100%, and you can't be outside of, you're restricted. So for a whole month, they don't know what happened to me because I can't write anything. And the War Department in Virginia confirmed, they pulled out my records with my signature on it, and they said he's seriously wounded. So I don't know what thought went through my parents' mind when for a whole month there was no communication whatsoever. So I finally landed. There was a French luxury liner that I was on in the North Atlantic, and we came back to New York, and then we went to New Jersey, where where they were going to let us go home from New Jersey, Fort Dix. I was wondering, it was customary at that time that the soldiers would walk in on their parents, and greet them. But there was one of the fellows who was walking along and he was crying. What happened? Well, his father was deathly sick. Well, I figured, I haven't been home for over a year or more. I wonder if everybody's all right. Not thinking that they had gotten telegrams, 2 telegrams. So I figured, I'd better call. So I decided to call my parents. And it was late in the evening. And there was no answer. So I then decided to call my brother. And my sister-in-law got on the phone. So I says, Roz? She says, yes. I says, this is Bernie. So she says, Bernie who? I says, your brother-in-law. So she says, what happened? Where are you? So I told her I was in Fort Dix. And she says, how badly were you wounded? I says, must have been a mistake. Because, I only had a little flesh wound on my leg. She says, no. She says, no. She says, you can maybe tell that to Mom and Pop, but we know something different. What happened? I says, I'm perfectly all right. So she explained what was taking place in there. So I says, I'll be home shortly. In maybe a couple of weeks, I'll be home. And she said, did you call Mom and Pop? I says, yeah, but I kept on ringing. Nobody answered. She says, they're home, so you keep on ringing until you get home. So anyhow, I called the home again. I kept on ringing. My father got on the phone. I says, Pop, this is Bernie. I'm in the United States. I'm in New Jersey. The phone goes dead. My mother then gets on the phone, and I tell her I'm going to be home in a couple of weeks. So she says, what happened? She says, Iz went to Washington and to Virginia. We know you were seriously wounded. I says, had to be a mistake someplace along the line there. I says, you'll see me in a couple of weeks. I'm all right. So I satisfied him for the time being. Okay, I finally got home and had the regular parties and so forth. Now I go back for classification. Now I go in front of a board of inquiry where they had high-ranking officers, and they questioned me every inch of the way as to what I was doing. I had 60 combat missions in. I was wounded twice, had 2 crash landings. There's one thing I forgot to tell you. When I came back on the boat, my eyes started to swell up. And I figured, oh geez, I don't know what's happening now. I mean, I'm getting an infection in my eye. So I'm afraid to say anything to anybody because I'm afraid they're going to start operating or doing something. So I'm now at the Board of Inquiry, and they want to know what ailments, what things are still pending. And I hated to tell them, but I finally broke down. I said, I'm still having problems with my eye. So there were all medical men and everything else there. So they said, well, we want to send you to a convalescing hospital. I says, I would prefer just going back to active duty again. They said, it's not really a hospital. It's a resort. You can do whatever you want to do there. The food is excellent. And boy, they weren't kidding. I'll tell you something. I went there for 3 months. They treated us like kings. We had the finest food you can eat. The general used to walk in line with us. We had to go to school, okay, during the day. But in the evening, we had a free time. I was studying meteorology. I was studying pilot training. I was studying link trainer. I was getting myself a real good education in there. And in the evening, we were able to do whatever we want, visit the various places. And it was really great for me. But when I was coming back on the boat with my eyes starting to become infected, I decided I better tell him. And the session was pretty much over. So I'm walking along behind the doctor, and I see a sign that says operating room. I says, I can't believe it. Sure enough, he put me on an operating table, and he took a piece of plexiglass out of my eyelid. This piece of plexiglass had to be in there at least 3 months or more, and it was trying to force its way out, and when it came close, it would become infected. And that, they took it out, and then they offered me a good position in the hospital. The war was coming pretty much towards an end now. The German war was over, and the Japanese war was coming almost to a close. And they wanted to send me to jet propulsion school. where I would probably become a crew chief, and then I would have been going to officers training. But I figured I really can't do this to my parents. I mean, they had gone through really hell with all the telegrams and everything. Now, I had to have 65 points to be discharged. And they counted each medal that I had 5 points, and I had 25 medals. And I had 165 points, which was the largest that day. So I decided to take an honorable discharge and then start life from that point on. Well, I think that gives you a pretty good idea of what we were doing during World War II.
Thank you very much, Sergeant. We're going to have time for some questions. We're going to do what we've done in the past. Raise your hand. I'll bring the microphone to you. We're going to go from one side to the other, and only one question. We want one question with 6 tag-alongs. We want to give everybody an opportunity. Number 1.
What was the name of your aircraft?
It was a B-26 Martin Murata.
No, the nickname of it.
We flew anything that would stay in the air. We had no planes.
What I meant was that some of them have a girl painted on it.
Well,
Did you have a nickname to it? The
there was,
fancy lady or something?
yeah, they were planes. We had Central 2, I think, was they'd given a plane, so they were able to name the planes. But the planes were whatever plane would be accessible to us that we would be able to using. We didn't have our own plane. We didn't even have our own crew anymore. We flew with anybody, with any position you had. And I don't know if it was a mistake or not, but I wanted to be the best flight engineer that they had. So I went to radio school, I went to navigation school, I went to bombardiering school. I knew every part of that airplane and how to opt the Norton bomb sight and whatever was available. And I was flying different positions because we didn't have enough personnel to keep those planes going. So we had to keep on flying. I was flying every day that the weather permitted.
Next question on this side.
Sir, do you remember the name of the place? Was it Luxembourg, where you had to clear for General Patton, the Siegfried line? Do you recall the
I don't recall. I have it written down. It was over Otterbach, Germany.
Okay, Otterbach. Was it anywhere near Echternach?
I'm not sure.
Luxembourg City?
No, I don't believe. No, it was this. It was.
Siegfried line,
It was
right.
a Siegfried line.
I
Yeah.
was in the Siegfried line last October.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
where we found where my husband's brother was killed.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, we were in the Siegfried line. You don't recall the town or the area.
The only thing I have
all right.
is the over Otterbach, Germany.
Thank you.
Next question.
Was your eyesight affected?
It took a long time, but it missed the main organ of my eye by only 6 millimeters, less than a quarter of an inch, and I did get my sight back.
This one over here. Mike.
Sir, the Norton bomb site was our top secret. Did you, at any time in the Army Air Corps, have specific orders that if you were going to crash land, to destroy it or make sure the enemy wouldn't get it?
Well, that's what they were trying. They would want to do if they could is get rid of the bomb site if they knew that they want to get crashed. And if it didn't, they didn't have any charge on it, but you can sure as heck throw it out to Bombay's or someplace. But you weren't supposed to give them access to that bomb site. That bomb site was really treasured. It was one of our best units. There were 2 bomb sites. One was a Bendix bomb site that the B-17s used, and we used a Norton bomb site. The way the thing operated, there were 2 dials on it. One would bring the hair over to a vertical, one which would be horizontal. And when you were on the target and those hairs did not move, the chances are you had 100% accuracy in bombing.
Thank you.
Sergeant, it was a very intriguing presentation. Thank you. With heavy bomber units in England, such as the B-17, the crew were, I guess most of the war, the crew were sent back to permitted to go back to the States after 25 missions. I was curious what requirements you had with a medium bomber, sir.
Well, when we started out, they were talking about 25, but that never materialized. And when you got to 25, then you flew to 30, 40, 50, 60. My pilot had 64 missions in. And they just did not have the qualified personnel to man the ships. They had the airplanes, but they didn't have the qualified people. It took over a year just to train a flight engineer, and it took longer than that for pilots. So they just didn't have it.
Thank you very much for everything you did. You explained it extremely well, and we all owe you a debt of gratitude. I know you personally did not experience the Tuskegee Airmen, but I was able to attend the dinner they had a couple weeks ago, and if anybody would like to look at this booklet, again, that was not your contact, but they were quite an outstanding unit when they finally got their chance later in the war, and anybody who wants to look at their booklet is welcome to do so.
Thank you. Any other questions?
What bomb load did you carry, and what altitude did you release from?
Okay, first of all, we were low-level bombing. We couldn't go over 10,000 feet because we didn't carry oxygen. So we were operating somewhere around 7,000 feet. In fact, when we hit the Pole Valley, Brenner Pass, the mountains were 10,000 feet, and we were buzzing those mountains just so we can get to the target. But the bomb, we were using 4,000 pounds of bombs, whether we used 2,000 pounders or 6 500 bombs, depending upon what type of target we had. We used fragmentation bombs if we went into troops. We were a tactical outfit. Our job was to stop supplies. We specialized in blowing up bridges most of the time. Bridges, viaducts, dumps, ammunition dumps, things of that nature to stop the supplies. Generally, we were talking about in the 5,000 feet. At the beginning, even before my time in there, they were doing low-level bombing, and they were losing planes one right after another. It was awful. And then our plane originally had a smaller wingspan than what we were, and this was a very dangerous plane. the Marauder, until they got a larger spring, the wingspan, and then they cut down the fatalities.
Don, do you have any words of wisdom?
Oh, I can always find a few here and there. I want to remind you that there are costs involved with this, and we have a donation jar back there and some envelopes if you'd like to use them. We'd very much appreciate it. I also would like to call to your attention the item in our newsletter about the Homefront stories. Mildred Hirschner is here, and she has written a couple of stories about the Homefront. We'd like to collect. Are we on? Yeah, we're on. We'd like to collect more stories because we'd like to add to our website with Homefront stories as well as stories of the military. If you haven't gone to our website recently, please do take a look at it, World War II lectureinstitute.com. It's on the newsletter. Brandon Traster has done a great job of getting an awful lot of material on there. We've got movie reviews and book reviews, and a number of stories that we've got there of veteran stories, and we've got quite a bit about our Veterans in the Classroom project, which has gotten off to a real fine start this year, and we're looking forward to spreading it not only locally but through the internet to other sites around the country. What I'm holding here is a notebook that half or more of it is stories that Brandon Traster has transcribed from interviews that he's made with something over 350 veterans. I'll just open it and show you a few. It'll be on the table at the back. He's put pictures with it. He's put symbols, the ribbons, the medals. It's nicely done, and he has a separate website that he's putting his oral history stories on. So we're preserving them, making them available, and as we find the funds and the manpower to work with us, we want to get our videotapes edited and prepared for publication. We have the capability with Jack Sky now. He digitizes the videotapes, which allows us to do editing and cutting out of the bad pictures and whatever, and put titles on it. And we can make DVDs as well as VHS tapes, and those will be available. But until we get into production and until we get the funds and the manpower to do it, they're just sitting on the shelf waiting to be ready. Tonight, Mike, what's his name, Kavanaugh, is going to be presenting a check for about $250 to our World War II Lecture Institute. That's the proceeds, the net proceeds from the Saturday seminar that was held back in May, where we had, they had 3 panels, an Army, Navy, and Air Force panel, and 3 of our, mostly our speakers, were on each of the panels, Army, Navy, and Air Force. So I think he's going to have a tape of that available if any are interested in getting it. That's about it. What else? Anybody? Coffee? There's some coffee here, and we're finding that in the hot weather people are not drinking coffee that much, and so we're wondering maybe we ought to just make an announcement that don't plan on coffee next time, and most of you won't miss it because you haven't been having it anyhow. Maybe when it starts getting cool again, we'll start up a coffee pot. We have soda and cookies and things, so that's about it, and see you next month.
How you doing?
Fine job.
Oh, thank you.
Netta?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. How are you?
Fine.
Good.
Nice.
Good.
You did a
Yeah.
really good job.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
See any of the people from your unit? Are you in touch with them?
Okay, I met my pilot after 54 years at a reunion, okay? And I do talk to him. I talked to him just recently. Now, my co-pilot went into Air Transport Command, and he died in civilian life. My radio man was shot down and taken prisoner of war. My tail gunner ran into a mountain. He was killed. My original navigator, who I was very friendly with, who lived in Philadelphia, sent a letter to the convalescing hospital where it was, said he had 59 missions in, and he'd be home soon, and we're going to have a real good time. Somewhere between the 59th and the 64th mission, he was killed. This is one crew.
We were called the
Thank you.
one of our airplanes called the Flying Coffin.
Yeah, that's right.
B-26s.
That's right. At the beginning they were. Ronnie, how are you? Good. Okay, good, good. Yeah. Well, try. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, good, Ron. Thanks for coming.
Is there a picture of the northern bomb site?
No.